on the International Criminal Court to investigate possible crimes against humanity in that country.
Well, according to a UN report released on Monday, Burundi has witnessed widespread rights abuses, including killings, torture, sexual violence, degrading treatment, enforced disappearances and arbitrary arrests since April 2015, when protests erupted against President Pierre Nkurunziza's controversial bid to run for a third term in office.
Alleged perpetrators of the violence include top officials in Burundi's National Intelligence Services and Police Force, military officials and members of the Youth League of the ruling party known as Imbonerakure. About 500 to 2,000 people have died in the unrest and nearly 400,000 Burundians have been displaced. We have joining us via Skype an African Affairs analyst, David Zaremka. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, it's not the first time that the UN is coming out with this damning reports about human rights abuses in Burundi on the part of government officials and, of course, supporters of the government. But the real fear that they have expressed is that these atrocities will go unpunished, that these people will actually go scot-free.
Well, that's correct. I mean, they had already asked the ICC, International Criminal Court, to investigate the problems in Burundi. And so this investigation, this inquiry was sort of a follow-up of that to get more details. But the Burundian government has always declined any of this is happening, and has did not allow the committee of inquiry to come into Burundi itself. So their results were from interviewing about 500 people who are the refugees who have left from Burundi.
Well, it seems that the ICC is incapacitated because Burundi last year already formally announced its withdrawal from the court, and then that will take effect from next month. And unless the UN Security Council asks the ICC to do so, I cannot do anything on the Burundian crisis.
Well, that's not quite correct. They can continue with the investigation they have, and of course they can go to the Security Council, and frankly, Burundi has very little support from almost anybody in the world that I can see. So it's very likely that the Security Council might ask the ICC to investigate after they have withdrawn. But they still have until October the 27th to before the withdrawal is in effect. And so part of this commission inquiry is to move that process along so it starts before October the 27th and can continue.
Now, beyond these reports coming from the UN, do you think organizations like the UN, other international organizations, and indeed the AU have been strong enough in their response in checking these atrocities by Pierre Nkurunziza's government?
Oh, definitely not. Well, one of the problems is that some of the others that have been involved, particularly Uganda, has some of the same problems that Burundi has, a leader that wants to stay in power for till he dies, I guess. And so they aren't looked at as exactly neutral kinds of people. And Rwanda, of course, is the bad guy, according to the Burundians, and is responsible for anything that happens. When you want to oppress a population, you have to have an enemy. In this case, Rwanda is the enemy. And Rwanda, I think, has actually tried to keep their hands off of the situation as much as possible. I do think, though, that if there's any kind of programs against the Tutsi in Burundi, that the Rwandans will respond quite vigorously, including with military action if necessary.
All right, let's look at the regional bloc there in East Africa. Recall what heads of state of ECOWAS did for the people of Gambia to oust the former dictator there, Yahya Jammeh. And then, of course, the East African community heads of states have pretty much not been able to rein in President Pierre Nkurunziza in East Africa.
Yes, they definitely have not reined him in, and they haven't, I don't think, tried very hard. Nothing like what was happened in Gambia, where leader after leader went to talk in Gambia itself, and then they put military pressure and political pressure and economic pressure and all these kinds of things until it was resolved. This has not happened really with Burundi. I think Kenya pretty much has kept their hands off of the situation, and Tanzania has looked at as being kind of supportive of Nkurunziza, although I'm not sure that that's that accurate, but still they have not played a strong part against Nkurunziza. Unlike, I think, other, the European community in particular and the United States have been extremely strong against Nkurunziza. And like I say, he doesn't really have any countries that are strongly in support of what he's been doing.
Of course, a climate of pervasive fear in Burundi, that's how the situation has been described when it comes to victims of these atrocities. What kind of sanctions would you recommend? Human Rights Watch has said that Burundi should be removed from the UN's Human Rights Commission as part of penalties.
Well, that's one possibility, and probably should happen. Burundi is part of the East African community, and that's another place where they're already out of compliance in many ways with the East African community. And this is another thing where the pressure could be put on them. Their economy is tanking. They've closed the border with Rwanda, and they don't really, it's a very small country with very few resources, and so it's now become the poorest country in the world. So there are, I think, a lot of other possible ways of putting pressure on Nkurunziza, and I think the pressure should be not to step down or other, but rather to participate in dialogues with the opposition. And this is what they've refused to do, except for their hand-picked people that they want to talk with. But the real opposition, which is out of the country, of course, they have been refusing over and over to have any dialogue with them.
Indeed, the government has refused to hold any dialogue conducted by the EAC. But then it seems previous sanctions have not worked on the government of Burundi, even with the UN taking so many moves against it. But somehow President Pierre Nkurunziza doesn't seem to be phased.
Well, it's only economic sanctions that they've really done. And Burundi is a very poor country. Most of the people live on subsistence agriculture. So there isn't a lot of economic pressure to put on Burundi. For example, if you were in Kenya, you have lots of abilities for economic pressure on a country like Kenya. But Burundi, there isn't a whole lot. Now, what they want to do, the Commission in Cairo wants to put sanctions on various individuals, particularly in the security divisions, to put pressure on the top leaders, and maybe including Nkurunziza themselves. Now, let me add something else. The security offices from the Arusha Agreement in 1903 and 1904 was that the army and the police would be half Hutu and half Tutsi, and that they integrated the then Tutsi army and the Hutu rebels together, and so they made the armed forces that we have now. But there's a lot of dissension, and in the security forces themselves, there's frequent cases where different military people have been assassinated, sometimes by other military people. It's very difficult for an outsider to understand exactly who's doing what. But there clearly are these dissensions within the military itself. And so it's a very unstable kind of situation. And I think this is also one of the reasons why there's such a negative, forceful reaction by the government to any dissent in the country.
But then, David, European Union suspended aid to the government of Burundi last year, and even the soldiers were not favored in some of the missions conducted just to pile pressure on the government. And so far, of course, we know that the government, like I said earlier, is not phased, and we hear representatives of the government of Burundi saying that it's even the agenda of the European Union to politically motivate people against the government in power.
Well, they say that, but on the other hand, they are very appreciative of the fact that Burundi has 5,000 troops in Somalia who are paid quite well, and they rotate them in and out so that almost everybody in the Burundi military has been in Somalia at one time or another, where they get a salary that's about 10 times what they would normally get. And so this is one of the ways that the Burundi military sort of pays for itself. These are tremendous perks for the country. So there was a point earlier this year where the EU wanted to stop paying the Burundi government for their soldiers, and then Burundi, of course, said, well, we're going to withdraw, and then the EU and the others, AU, backed down and allowed, well, they're paying directly now, the soldiers directly rather than through the Burundi government as they were doing before. But nonetheless, this is a tremendous perk for the Burundi military, and it's one of the things that keeps them in power.
Yes, indeed. But of course, all of these allegations, the Burundi government of Pierre Nkurunziza has said that they're all just based on bias and unsubstantiated, according to him, in spite of the fact that some 564 executions have taken place in that country. David Zaremka, I want to say thank you so much for your time and your contribution on TVC Breakfast this morning.
Thank you for coming.
All right, that's how we wrap the show this Wednesday morning. Thank you so much for being a part of it. We look forward to having you join us again tomorrow, Thursday, and of course, Friday. Indeed. You don't want to miss it.
Indeed.
Thank you so much.
It's been a lovely run, really, today. Thank you for watching it. And of course, let's leave you with the weather outlook across major cities in the country today. I am Azizat Olaoluwa.
And I am Ngozi Alebu. Have a beautiful day. Bye now.